Okay, so hello again, everybody. Today we have Francesco Dovidio with us, and Jacobo Aguirre is the one who suggested that we could invite him, so he's going to present him. So go ahead, Jacobo.
Thanks, Maria. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Francesco Dovidio, he's Italian. He studied physics in Italy, in Milano, I think. But he developed his PhD in the chaos group of DTU, of the Danish Technical University, outside Copenhagen, where we met around, I don't know, 20 years ago or something like that. And in that place, he discovered something that is now very often, but in that case, in that moment, it wasn't so much, that physics and biology could merge, and the interaction between both disciplines was very fruitful. Then he went to Berkeley. He spent some years traveling around. And in fact, he spent almost 2 years in Spain, in Mallorca, in the Institute for Complex Systems of the SIC. And it was there where he started with what we can say, simplifying a lot, that it is his main scientific line of work, which is the interaction between the ocean dynamics and the ecosystems that develop and evolve in this kind of environment. For the last 15 years around, he has had a permanent position at CNRS in France, in Paris, in particular in the L'Océan Institute, which is an institute devoted to oceanography and climate. And he is the team leader of the Proteo group. Besides that, he has also worked with la NASA. He's right now involved in the SWOT satellite mission. And well, his work, the techniques he uses are those typical of complex systems, in the sense that he does mathematical, if you want, applied mathematical work. He does numerics and computation stuff. And well, he sees all these biological systems from the point of view of this kind of tools, more both formal and also numeric, but always using experimental data obtained both from satellites, but also from several oceanographic campaigns that he has developed all around the globe. Besides being a good friend, he's an excellent scientist and a very good speaker. And also, as you can see, his work is very transdisciplinary. So I'm absolutely sure that, sorry, I'm sure that his work will be of interest for all of us. He told me to tell you that if anyone wants to interrupt him, no problem, please go ahead. But anyway, there will be time at the end to discuss and ask him whatever we want. Thanks a lot, Francesco, for being here, at least electronically. And please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Jacopo, for the introduction and for inviting me. So it was a great pleasure to receive this invitation, and also a challenge to try to color the theme on which I work in terms of something that could be interesting for astrobiology. So as Jacopo said, indeed, my main interest is the coupling between the ocean dynamics, especially we will see the dynamics related to a type of vortex which is very common in the open ocean, and marine life. So what I thought has been to structure my presentation in 3 parts, which are more or less independent. In the first, it's a kind of a general introduction in which we'll see some scientific results, but especially it is to set the stage for the other 2 themes. In particular, in the first one, the main idea is to introduce the mesoscale and the mesoscale vortices. By the way, in oceanography, for reason that I don't know exactly, but these mesoscale vortices that are of the size of about 100 kilometers are called mesoscale eddies. So I'll try to use the word vortex and vortices in order to be clear. But if sometimes you will hear eddy, that is just a synonym of mesoscale vortex. In the second part, I will speak about a way in which these features have been used in the past in order to develop some experiments in the context of geoengineering. Geoengineering, I think in your language is more, it could be called terraforming, in the sense that these are some techniques that are aimed at the planetary scale to deliberately change the course of climate. It's a very sensible subject, scaring in some sense, but still at least the technology for doing that, it is at our reach, and some of these techniques are indeed discussed as some concrete options to combat climate change. Then the third part, it's more the kind of a conservative approach in which we can see the ocean as a source of services for us, of solutions for climate change, and also an heritage that we want to protect. And in this regard, we will see how the understanding of the dynamics of our liquid planet is important for establishing marine protected areas. So in terms of timing, I will try to finish at about 12:45, so that hopefully we can have some discussion later on. So let's start with speaking about an impression that we have when we compare the landscape that we are used to, a terrestrial one, to the liquid part of the ocean. So I will focus on the open ocean. Basically, it's really the liquid part, far from the coast and above the bottom of the ocean, where indeed there are no fixed references like topography that can provide some structures as on land. On land, indeed, when we think about a landscape, we think about mountains, valleys, and then when we think about ecosystems, we would put, if we imagine that we have to draw a landscape, we'll put some forests, some more arid lands. In the ocean, in contrast, we have the impression that the landscape in that liquid part is not very interesting. It's just something mixed by turbulence, where there are no contrasts like the one we are used to see on land. The situation actually is very different if we don't use our eyes, that are the eyes of animals that have spent many thousand years on land. But if we use some instruments to analyze the ocean, this is an example that we will see later on. For instance, where the water-living radiance from the ocean is analyzed, so that a pigment that is associated to photosynthesis, chlorophyll, is estimated in terms of its concentration in the water. Then we see that suddenly there are a lot of contrasts in the ocean as well. The red parts are regions that can be 10 times or more concentrated than the blue parts. We can say in some sense that the red parts correspond to the forest in the ocean that are not made by trees in this case, but by the microscopic cells of phytoplankton. And then the deserts are the blue parts in which is not water that is missing in the ocean, but where nutrients brought by currents are in reduced quantity, so that also the biomass that we find in this region is less abundant. Then there are contrasts, but there's a big difference in respect to our terrestrial landscape, in the sense that the features that we are here, we see their shape are more reminiscent actually of meteorology. We see there are some vortices, we see some filaments, and indeed I don't have here an animation, but these features can change very quickly. The lifetime, which is typical for a mesoscale vortex, so this feature of about 100 kilometer sides, can be of the order of a few weeks to few months. And if you look at the duration of a phytoplanktonic bloom, so the period in which suddenly the production of biomass increase very quickly, typically in springtime, you also find periods of the order of several weeks. So there's a strong resonance in between the temporal variation of the physical landscape and the temporal variation of ecological processes. This resonance actually extends to the entire trophic web. If you look, for instance, at the exploratory trip of top predators, which are looking for food, they also are in the range of periods that goes from weeks to months. So in some sense, it's very counterintuitive for us. If you think to a predator on Earth, for instance, a wolf who is looking for its prey around the mountains, in the ocean, for making the analogy, you would have the mountain that is disappearing while the wolf is looking for its prey. So a very specific situation for the physical landscape that is the background of ecological interaction, which is a mixture between the terrestrial part of our landscape and the atmospheric meteorology. So I give here some definitions that can be useful to have in the following. Historically, there has been a tendency of distinguishing several regimes in the ocean. We can speak about the large-scale ocean circulation when we look at it on the scale of years. In this case, for space, in terms of the basin scale, typically distances of thousands of kilometers. And then historically, there was, let's say, until maybe the 50s, a difference of the large scale with the small scale, which was the scale of isotropic turbulence in the ocean. Then, starting from the 70s, there has been empirical evidence of the existence of these vortices, the mesoscale eddies that have been put in between the small scale and the large scale. And then in the last maybe 20 years, another regime has been explored, especially with numerical simulation, that today is called the sub-mesoscale. I will focus in my talk on this part of the dynamics of the ocean, the mesoscale and the submesoscale. Together, we call sometimes the fine scales. The reason is that on the temporal axis, they have a resonance with biological processes, so they have a very strong structuring effect on life in the ocean. And then another important reason is that if you look at the spatial scale, then these features have typical scales of the order of a few kilometers, few tens of kilometers, that are the resolution limit of climate resolving models. So these are processes that cannot be represented explicitly by models, and then processes that we need to parameterize in order to reduce the error in climate simulations. So let's see some notions just of, I would say, general culture. If we want to measure the circulation of the ocean, the most used platform is satellite, especially with altimetry sensors. Altimetry captures, measure the distance between the satellite and the surface of the ocean, and so that by the and there can be a lot of information that can be derived from it. You have heard, I think, about the sea level rise associated to climate change, and altimetry is one of the way by which we can monitor it, following this trend, which is currently about 3 to 4 millimeter per year, and also to map the difference around the globe, with some regions that are rising faster than some others. Today, our interest is not really on this type of analysis of altimetry data, but more at a smaller scale, in which the difference in elevation of the sea surface is balanced by the Coriolis force. You can imagine that if you have a current that is going in some direction, because of the fact that Earth is rotating, there's a force pushing on the side, and this force can pull some water and create a pressure gradient. So with altimetry, we do not measure directly the velocity of the water, but we measure this effect of deforming the sea surface height thanks to altimetry. And then we can have some maps, which today have a resolution of about 30 to 50 kilometers, in which you see, for instance, here is around the Balearic Islands, the ubiquitous presence of these recirculating features, which are the mesoscale vortices, the mesoscale eddies. So to have an idea of the quantities associated to them in terms of deformation of the sea surface height is something that we cannot detect by eye, because at our scale, this is covered by the presence of waves. You have differences of a few centimeters on distances of hundreds of kilometers. And in terms of speed, typical speeds in the upper layer in the ocean are of the order of, let's say, 10 centimeters per second. So this is the difference of the vision that we had in the 18th century and the vision that we have now with real-time data, in which all these rotating features can be detected. I just want to mention, as Jacopo said, I'm involved in this mission that will be launched in 2022, which is a kind of a revolution for oceanography, because it will allows us to detect features that are 10 times smaller than today. So in terms of, for instance, biophysics, it's very interesting because that is the resolution for which we have biological data. And in terms of reconstruction of three-dimensional ocean dynamics, that's also very important to get right the precise gradient in the sea surface height. Complementary to altimetry, something that is very much used when looking at coupled processes in the open ocean is ocean color. So as we saw in the first images, with natural colors, the contrasts for us are almost negligible, but we can extract the signature of different pigments. The one that is used more is for chlorophyll, but there can be other techniques even to detect the presence of specific phytoplanktonic types from space. This is an example to show the richness in features that we have. You can recognize probably some patterns typical of chaotic steering, and in that case you can see some of the connection with the mathematical tools that have been developed in nonlinear dynamics and chaos theory with oceanography that were quite popular in the 90s. So very simple notions about phytoplankton. It needs light, good environmental parameters, nutrient, and then it has mortality factors like predation and viruses. In terms of the vertical dynamics of the ocean, another concept that is important to have for the following is that the first approximation, we can separate the water column in two parts. A top layer, the mixed layer, which is well mixed due to the fact that there are rapid heat exchange and so buoyancy changes due to the contact with the atmosphere, and an inner part which is more stratified. Regarding phytoplankton, the upper layer is the one which receives sunlight and is recharged in nutrient, typically during winter time, when the mixed layer deepen and mixed with water that is not exposed to light and where nutrient is not consumed by phytoplankton. So these are the global pattern. Here you can see the large scale. So at the moment, we are too far from the Earth to see the mesoscale vortices that I talked before. And you see some signature of the big current features. But the interesting thing that I want to present you today is when we zoom inside this image. So this picture that you see here is what we call a climatology. That means an average of the chlorophyll signal over several years. And you see this liquid planet as a very smooth map of chlorophyll. The interesting part comes when you take a relatively small part of it, like this relatively homogeneous region of about 1,000 kilometers of length, and then you zoom in terms of space and time. So instead of looking at an average over 5 years, we look at instantaneous image taken during the spring bloom. And now the difference is extremely strong in the sense that the color scale that is used in this instantaneous image is the same as the one that is on the climatology. So the contrast that you have here on just a few kilometers are the same that are in the image on the top for 1,000 of kilometers. Well, the implications in terms of life, you can see are intuitively are very strong. In terms of biodiversity, you can imagine that the presence of these mesoscale vortices that create this strong physical contrast that reflect in biological production makes that you can have at the distance of a few kilometers conditions that can give rise to different phytoplanktonic populations, which means that you need just a small stir, like the stir that is not small, actually can be very strong at the periphery of the eddies, to mix together two different communities and then create high biodiversity in this region. So in terms of, it can be interesting in this way to imagine two different planets. One planet in which we could suppress all these mesoscale vortices, the one in the top, and another planet like our planet, in which we have this feature. So we saw a difference in biodiversity, but there can be differences also in terms of trophic relation. If you think to a higher trophic level, a predator in a planet in which there is no mesoscale activity, then if this predator needs to go in region of high chlorophyll concentration, its range will be limited to the red part. Also, since the red part is more or less uniform, this predator does not need a big brain. Once it is there, it can just drift around and collect some food. The situation is very different if you think to a planet with this mesoscale contrast. In this case, a predator that cannot recognize easily the presence of a mesoscale feature, it could spend some time swimming in a region that is low productive, and in this case spend more energy for swimming than the energy that it gets by finding its prey. So in this case, we can imagine that the fact that top predators have a large brain is also due to the fact that they must analyze a lot of data to navigate into this landscape and locate these mesoscale features, distinguishing the ones that are profitable to the ones that are not interesting for finding prey.
Excuse me, Francesco. I have a question.
Please.
You were talking about two different planets, but I mean, I wonder whether you have studied that kind of difference in the intelligence of the animals also in this planet. So has anybody seen that more clever fish, for example, move in these little structures, and the animals that are less clever go to the other one?
No, I must say that this part, I said that we can imagine in the sense that this part is more speculative. What we know about top predators, there are some recent studies that follow the juveniles, so individuals that are not experienced at sea. And then it is very clear that the individuals that are lost, that seems to be, looking at the trajectories, lost in the sense that they cannot find in the first months the regions that are quite productive will die very quickly. And the others that survive are the ones that find a way to localize productive regions, and then develop a kind of fidelity to these regions for going back back and forth each year. So in this sense, there's a behavior that is developed in order to select these features. But and I will show an example later, especially with some elephant seals. What is missing is to show that a stupid animal does not recognize this kind of feature. We'll elaborate a bit more with when we see an example with the Southern Ocean. Now we will accelerate a bit because we are running out of time. So this is the example about the elephant seal. On the background, you see another way to detect mesoscale vortices. This is the Lyapunov exponent technique that, as I was saying before, it's a technique that comes from nonlinear dynamics and can allow us to detect very well fronts that are generated by the dynamics of the eddy. And so here you see in gray these lines that are the fronts associated to the mesoscale vortices. And then the purple line is a trajectory of an elephant seal equipped with the sensor that you see in the photo. What is interesting is to look at the round markers, which shows the tentative of capture of prey. This is in practice quantified by looking at the data from an accelerometer that is mounted on the sensor, and that provides a proxy of the animal chasing a prey. And then you see that the animal starts to find a lot of prey at the moment in which it arrives at the periphery of this vortex. Then it remains around the periphery. It's a trip that lasted about 2 weeks. And then you see that as the capture rate are reduced, then the animal is also leaving this periphery of the eddy. So elephant seals are very skilled swimmers. They are supposed to be very clever animals, and here you have an example of the use of a mesoscale eddy by a top predator. And this is quite common. There has been similar observations for many different top predators in the ocean. So this is you can say a kind of long introduction in which I wanted to introduce the open ocean as a kind of liquid planet with a specific turbulence. These vortices in particular of 50, 100 kilometers that are ubiquitous and that have a strong resonance with ecological processes. They steer water at their periphery, and they can trap water at their cores. So they make the landscape over which trophic interactions occur, as the example that we saw. And this is a speculation, but we can imagine that their presence had probably a strong effect on the development of life forms and interactions between different species on Earth. Now, let's see how these vortices can be related to geoengineering. So geoengineering is this, we can say, scary business of altering the course of climate in a deliberate way. We can say that we are doing geoengineering implicitly every day when we emit carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But in this case, with geoengineering, we really want to design a specific techniques to affect the climate, so not as an indirect effect. There are many techniques that are under study, and today I will speak about this one that you see in the middle, about ocean iron fertilization. So why fertilizing the ocean is interesting for geoengineering, and why with iron? First of all, the idea is that we want to improve the way in which the ocean can export carbon by producing organic matter, and then bringing down the carbon which is inside once that phytoplankton die. Here I show 4 different trajectories that are taken from the IPCC report, I think of 2 years ago. The trajectory shows how the emission should be controlled in order to arrive at 2100 at zero net emission. So in one case, we can just think that we will stop to produce, to emit carbon dioxide. In the other scenarios, there's a background activity that is left out, and which is compensated by what is called bioenergy with carbon capture and storage techniques, which are these techniques for obtaining at the end a net negative effect on the emissions. So in terms of iron fertilization, the idea is pretty simple. There are regions in the ocean which have plenty of nutrient, but where there is no phytoplankton, not a lot of phytoplankton. This has been explained in the 70s with the fact that there are some micronutrients that are missing, in particular iron. So even a small ship with few tanks of a solution with iron can fertilize a large area and produce a big augmentation of phytoplanktonic biomass. And then at the end of the bloom, phytoplankton is supposed to sediment and go to the bottom of the ocean, in the open ocean, to the abyssal plain, thousands of meters below the surface, where carbon is stored for geological time scales. So this is on the paper. You can imagine that there is much more than this. First of all, it must be proven that carbon is exported, and so that indeed, if we continue to emit carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, this is because there is a proven technique that is exporting it in the ocean. And then you can imagine that creating a large bloom can also alter a lot the ecological equilibria. It would be like watering all the deserts on land. So there's not just the production of some plants, but there are also a disequilibrium on the ecosystems that are already there. I will be a bit quick on this part, just saying that there has been a first experiment in the 1999 in which some iron has been poured in the water, and a filament, as you see in this picture, after about 1 month, have been observed. So when you look at an oceanographic image, just keep in mind that 1 degree in latitude is about 100 kilometers. So you can see this filament was actually a big one of about 200 kilometers in length. So this proved the first part of the scenario that adding iron could create some phytoplanktonic production. They did not prove that the carbon was indeed exported down to the ocean. In order to prove the second part, there has been an experiment about 5 years later, in which this time the fertilization has been done inside an eddy. So this is an eddy that we identified with this, again, with this Lyapunov technique, and the square in the middle is the region that has been fertilized. It was quite useful to use this eddy because it kept the fertilized water mass for about 1 month, so that with sediment traps at the bottom of the mixed layer, it has been possible to measure the export of particulate organic carbon, that is the organic matter associated to phytoplankton. So this has been a special, a big step forward for iron fertilization, because it showed that indeed the technique could export carbon. And this result stirred a lot of debate that you can imagine if you look at the difference between the year of the experiment and the year of the publication of the paper. So about 8 years, maybe not 8 years, but several years with the referees. I will not go into the details, but I will show another experiment that has been done a couple of years some years later. Again, you can see this time there has been a nice chlorophyll image that could have been taken from satellite, and you can see the big patch due to fertilization inside this eddy. However, interestingly, no carbon export has been reported by the sediment traps inside the water column. So this has been quite interesting because it was contrary to the previous experiment. It showed actually the importance of looking at trophic relations, because in this case, what happened is that zooplankton actually grazed all the excess of phytoplankton. So we organized a big party for zooplankton, but no actual carbon export. There's been also a model study. With model, it is easy to fertilize everywhere. So what they did, they took a virtual planet and they decided to seed iron everywhere, so that they looked at the gain in terms of atmospheric carbon following this fertilization, this massive and global fertilization. And the effect you see is the difference between the full line and the dotted line. If you look on the horizontal, in practice, what happens is that by fertilizing the entire ocean with effects that are unpredictable on the ecosystem, anyway, you gain just a few years in terms of advancement of concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So the conclusion of this second part I wanted to talk about this geoengineering, which is, I think, the equivalent of probably terraforming in astrobiology. There are several techniques under study. The decision whether or not using these techniques does not belong to science. Then if you ask to me as a citizen, I'm completely against this technique. But if I speak as a scientist, what I can say is to provide the best information so that the decision can be taken at the political level. In terms of iron fertilization, scientific experiments have shown that carbon can indeed be exported, but not all of the time. There can be some trophic relations sometimes that are important. That anyway, the effect at the global scale is small, and also that ecological and long-term effects are expected but unknown. So these are all arguments that point against the use of this technique. And note that in order to have this information, it has been essential to identify this mesoscale eddies and to use them as basically as a megacosm in the living ocean. Just a few minutes, we are running out of time to speak about conservation. We are still remaining in the context of iron fertilization, but this time natural iron fertilization. This is what happens in the Southern Ocean, where the sources of iron are actually from islands and seamounts that can seed water. In this case, so I'm going a bit fast. Now we are speaking about looking at the role of the ocean for reducing, slowing climate change from a cautionary principle, and so with the establishment of marine protected areas. Don't want too much to go into the details, but these are very special years for creating marine protected areas, because there have been very ambitious objectives that we have at the international level, in particular to cover 30% of the ocean with marine protected area. For France waters, the French government wants to do even for the next year. Now, if we put all the marine protected areas together, we are at about 7%. So it means to protect 4 times more the ocean. And in this case, it is very critical to identify the regions that are more important to protect. The example that I wanted to show, and I will go very, very quick at this point, is in the Southern Ocean, where we have this natural iron fertilization from seamount. So with phytoplankton that is produced, zooplankton, then intermediate trophic levels, and then predators that are coming. So something that is maybe interesting in terms of astrobiology is the difference in the case of the open water when we have iron and when there is no iron. So with iron, we have diatoms, we have crustaceans, and then top predators. And in the other case, which corresponds more at the situation of a homogeneous ocean in which there is a bit of nutrient but not concentrated in some regions to produce a diatom. So there's a bit of phytoplankton scattered all over. Then there are gelatinous organisms that can basically filter a lot of water to accumulate the small biomass that is there. In terms of conservation, we concentrated around Kerguelen Islands. And here you see there is the Antarctic circumpolar current that goes from west to east, and it spread this micronutrient iron, creating this bloom for about 1,000 of kilometers. So we made several studies in order to understand the circulation. This is a Lagrangian study to look at the trajectories and to see how we could predict the patterns of the phytoplankton bloom. And then we added together data as the one that I showed before from the elephant seals, but for many different predators. And several indicators pointed to the importance of this region inside the economic exclusive zone of France, which is today under strict protection. So this was a bit quick, but it was for showing how the fact of understanding the details of the circulation and to put it in connection with observations of the trophic chain can be used sometimes to help decision makers to set their objectives in reality. So I conclude with this part by saying again that it's an historical moment for the creation of large marine protected areas with this 30% objective for 2030. We are looking a lot at the open ocean where direct human activity admittedly today is not that strong, but where in the future, for instance, with deep sea mining, there could be indeed some threats. And again, for the open ocean, we find this strong contrast created by this specific turbulence as the main tool to identify regions of ecological importance. Thank you to all. So I've been a bit out of time, but we started also a bit after 12.
Thank you, Francesco. Don't worry, we were late at starting, so it's perfectly fine. Thank you very much. Your talk was very interesting. I did enjoy hearing about a different science field. So let's go for the questions. Please raise your hand if you have one, and if you don't have a micro, you can write the question on the chat, and I will read it out loud for Francesco. So there is a hand from Isaskun. Isaskun, go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for the very nice talk, Francesco. I really enjoyed it. So this is a completely field, so I feel completely out of my expertise, so I may be asking something very silly. So I was wondering whether there has been any attempt to model the dynamics of the oceans, but for the early Earth. So whether there's any idea, or whether you think that there wouldn't be any difference with respect to the Earth nowadays.
Yeah, so this is a question also that goes far from my field as well. But there are, for sure, there are many studies about paleoclimatology in which there's been the reconstruction of the climate of the Earth in the past, and in that case, indeed, there are very different conditions in respect to today that had to be taken into account. Then the big difference is that these details of the circulation are available today, but not in the past far away.
I see. And then maybe the second silly question is whether, you know, in any other planet, you know, if it had oceans, but not with water being the main solvent, whether you would see similar behaviors. Like, for example, Titan, so it has methane lakes. So imagine if there were a planet with a different type of solvent, whether you would see similar effects.
Yeah, so something that in order to generate this peculiar turbulence with mesoscale eddies, there are a few ingredients that must be there. The first is the Coriolis force. So you need that the planet is rotating with some speed that must be important in respect to the density of the fluid which is in the planet. And the second one is a kind of global engine to put everything in motion and provide potential energy so that you can create these instabilities that on Earth is the thermoline circulation. So the fact that we receive more heat at the equator, and in this case we have some potential energy that we can dissipate with an energy cascade which contains this mesoscale eddies. Right. So for other planets, it could be very interesting to see which kind of turbulence they may have. I think that possibly, if I have to think to astrobiology, which is not at all my specialty, I was if I had to ask a question to you, I would ask whether this aspect of turbulence is taken into account when you look at life on other planets. So I understand that the relation with ice, for instance, or probably the difference in temperature as you descend in the planet can be important, but also the way in which if a possible fluid planet have its fluid mixed and steered around can also have in principle strong effect on the way in which life could develop.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
We have another question from Marina.
Yeah, it's me. Well, first of all, thanks for the talk. I wanted to ask, well, at the beginning, you showed that the difference on the altitude are of the order of centimeters. Is it right?
Yes, in the sea surface height?
Yeah.
Yes.
So how do you distinguish it with the noise and the waves, and what kind of waves do you use to measure it?
Yeah, it's a matter of scale, because the footprint of the satellite anyway is can make a few kilometers. So the signal of the wave is filtered by the fact that you make an average over a surface that contains many waves. So in that case, you can reduce, you can almost avoid that effect. The effect actually that is not negligible is the geoid, in the sense that the geoid is not a sphere, but has some anomalies which can also reflect in the sea surface height. So that is more difficult to eliminate. In order to do that, there are some techniques, but basically there are some satellite missions that are specifically designed to have the geoid at high resolution.
Oh, thank you. And what kind of wave is the satellite using?
What,
I mean, is it
the
radio
length
wave?
Yes, yes. It's indeed you are in the radio and microwave part of the spectrum, which is quite interesting because you can go through the clouds, so you can have images of the sea surface height, whatever the meteorological situation.
Thank you.
Jacobo has another question. Jacobo, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Francesco, for such an interesting talk. I have a comment and a question. The comment is relating what you just discussed with Izaskun, and I haven't read anything about, well, there are many people who are experts in exoplanets and things like that, and also in evolution in the audience, but I have never read, and it would be like a very interesting subject to study the potential influence of the rotation speed in the origin and evolution of life. In the sense that what you're explaining, even, I mean, not even in other countries, in other different planets, but also in ours. Of course, if it were rotating not so fast, obviously we wouldn't have this kind of strange structures that you have studied, in which there is higher concentration of things, of anything, of elements. In other ways, if there were some kind of resonance, which is very typical also in planets, between the day and the year in a sense, and make them rotate much slower, even if we had sea, in this sea there wouldn't be this kind of structures probably, and I don't know, but perhaps it would make much more difficult to make all the chemistry interact and work on that, and also in later ranges and in later moments of the evolution, also it could have some kind of influence. I have no idea, but I really think it is a very interesting subject to work on, or at least I'll try to find something in the literature if somebody has thought about that. And my question is completely different. Is that, well, you did a very nice talk in the descriptive way and for all kind of people, but I have a bit more technical question, and it is about modeling, which is really what is underneath all this information. When I studied this kind of stuff like 15 years ago, all the models were the turbulence is so complex. It's probably the most, I would say, one of the 3 or 4 most difficult subjects that the human can face right now in science, and we know almost nothing about it. And so the models 10, 15 years ago were most of them 2-dimensional and very simple. I suppose that you have increased a lot in that line, but I would like to know if you're working with just describing what you see with the photographs, there are strong models underneath. Which are the techniques that you're using, and how far are the computational results nowadays in comparison? How different are they in comparison to reality, and how optimistic are you that in the near future you'll be able to have really mathematical powerful results in this context?
So no, there has been an incredible advancement in terms of models. If you take models with primitive equations, they are extremely realistic today. So you can create a virtual ocean where the eddies are not placed as they are exactly today, but where the statistics of the turbulence is very, very close to the one that we have. Then if you want to make the output of the model as close as possible to the reality, so that you want a distribution of the currents which is very close to the one that you have today, for instance, then the technique that is used is called assimilation, in which basically you force your model with observations in order to keep the trajectory of the model very close to reality. And also in case of assimilation, due to the fact that there has been an exponential increase of platforms that are sent to the ocean. There are automatic platforms more or less everywhere. Now you have so many data that you can have a model with primitive equation, which is forced with the observation, that provides you an extremely three-dimensional and realistic vision of the real ocean.
And
so it's really, it's like what you get today with the meteorological forecasting.
Mm.
If you believe to meteorological forecasting, you can believe to to the ocean modeling. You can
I believe it in short
mismatch.
times. I guess that it is very similar in this case, no? That you can predict in a few days and not
Yes,
much.
yeah, it's a bit the same, and we don't care too much about the forecasting with models. What we really use the equivalent of the meteorological forecasting is to have to extrapolate the observations that we have in some points to the entire ocean.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks a lot.
So I have a question. When answering Marina, I think you mentioned a satellite that I think measures the altimetry, but at the beginning of the talk, you mentioned another satellite that is going to be launched, and it was going to map the surface topography, right? So what is this one going to improve? Is the resolution or?
Yeah, it's basically the resolution. It has a very different instrument, and it will be able to, I don't know how many technical details provide, but at the basic, which will have a resolution 10 times better than what is available today.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And there are some other missions that are on the way, which completely different ways of measuring the currents of the ocean. Like, for instance, with the Doppler effect. So not by looking at the indirect effect due to the Coriolis force, so not measuring the deformation of the sea surface height due to the currents, but measuring directly the velocity at the at the surface of the ocean with the Doppler effect.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, there will be plenty of nice things. And on the biological side, there will also be some hyperspectral instruments that will be able to detect much more than chlorophyll. So to detect the phytoplanktonic types, if there are diatoms, cocolithophorids, or other type of phytoplankton, looking at the specific tone of the color of the water-living regions.
And these are specific experiments, or are you talking about different satellites?
No, the instruments are already there, and there will be a mission that is launching also in about 2 years, looking at the ocean color with this smaller and better detail.
Okay, thank you.
Term.
I don't see any more questions. So thank you very much again for your talk. And I hope we can see you again when we start again with talks in person.
Yeah, with great pleasure.
Thank you. I'm gonna.
Thank you to all. Have a nice
stop
day.
recording.